right, so hey everyone,
Alrighty.
happy Friday. It's gonna be a great show. A lot of energy. I can already feel it. We're going to officially start in like a couple more minutes once a few more of you guys roll in. But we were just kind of like ranting about long-term price performance of cryptos and how the hype cycle thing. And just to hit my thesis or my, I guess whatever, real quick. First off, 90, I would say all like 90, 80%, let's say 80% at least of crypto is speculation as far as the value of all the market cap is, well, this will work. This will be used by real people in the future at some point. And probably Bitcoin and Ethereum have the most real usage percentage wise. It's really hard to say that, but maybe so far. And everything else has like really not good price charts long term, even if they do really well, because they pump really well and set bad expectations during their initial hype cycle. And then the hype just goes away. And it's really hard at this stage of the market where basically Bitcoin was like the first one in the money coin and it just built all that user base. And Ethereum was the other coin. So to introduce another competitor that actually has like meaningful volume and not just like transaction volume, but like money being put in to use it, it's just such a hard proposition. So even if you're doing great, your price is going to be tanking year after year after those first 4 years of your hype cycle or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just so hard to then maintain to keep growing the utility and the actual adoption during those years when everyone's just like ignoring you, kind of thing. So that's just kind of my brief little rant thingy on that.
Well, and in those early years, you establish a community, and a lot of people in those communities will hold on to their bags through the hype cycles. And then if it doesn't come up, because we're bringing up Tezos, and it's one of those coins where it never got its hype cycle. It missed that out based on like different factors that were going on for it. So, some, poor choices in-house, and some of it was like unfortunate circumstances for them, based on the timing of things and things that happen. And those people that hold their bags through the mini pumps and things like that get really demotivated, demoralized, or even for the projects, that do go through big blow ups, for the people that hold their bags and don't take, the payout throughout, it leads to a lot of demotivation. And they're the people ostensibly who they were in it for the tech or the purpose, behind that, so I think that factors into it. But for a coin like Tezos, where it misses that early hype cycle, it's hard to come back from that. But it to its credit, it has a really genuine large community of people that regularly use it. And it is one of those projects where I would say genuinely the community focuses on the tech, really cares about the tech.
Yeah. And
for good or ill. Yeah.
That's one thing that I've noticed. I hate to say it that this is good, but it is kind of, because what I don't think the crash is I don't think it's the crash that's good or bad. I think the crash is like reality. It's the pump that sucks. And I hate to say, because you need the pump to get something off the ground, but it's just so almost every, for example, Zcash was something like $5,000 a coin in the beginning. It was something brutal,
Good Lord, yeah.
something insane in the very first day. Of course, it went down after the first thing. But it's been a constant downward thing since then, and it's just $30 a coin or something really not good today.
Oh, and that messes up a coin's price action for and the way the chart looks for the future.
Yeah, especially a block reward funded coin. Now all of a sudden the development funding available is just not the same anymore. And so and the Zcash of back in the day had a trusted setup for its privacy thing, right? And I remember the first person ever buying something in a store, of course it was in New Hampshire, right, with shielded Zcash with a command line wallet that took 10 minutes to generate the proof on his laptop in a in-person store, just to nerd out on it. Now past that, you have Sapling and Orchard, different. Now the trusted setup is completely gone, which has now gotten the interest of communities like Monero. And I can just press one button on my phone and all my Zcash balance just goes shielded. I can just send it, zip.
Yep.
Like the tech is so much better, and it's had tons of staying power, and the usability, like everything about it has gone way better over the years, except the price is just like because of that. And so it's a little sometimes frustrating because it's hard to like pick back against momentum. And of course, you've seen the same thing with like Bitcoin Cash is having an interesting time because that was the whole like, oh yeah, usable version of Bitcoin, and then just like crash to like almost nothing, and then managed to pull out the Cash tokens upgrade, getting like smart contracts and scripts based on UTXOs rather than global state. Got that out the door, and now you start seeing some pumps. But even then, like, how much more pump can you get from Bitcoin Cash right now, this late in the game? Like, we'll see. Maybe this is their committee seems to think it's like the glorious march to victory at this point. But at the same time, it's just like it's a pump for ants on the chart. It's like if only there hadn't been all this upside in the very beginning, and it's just hard to reverse that momentum.
I can see that. Okay, so I'm kind of indifferent to whether the pumps are good or bad. They come with consequences, initially, and they can be good and bad. You get some good aspects and some negative aspects that come with the pump. You get the money, you get the resources, but then people might, like the people who are really interested and engaged, might just take the payoff and leave, or they may get distracted by having all that new wealth. And now their life priorities change, or they have enough rope to make poor decisions and hang themselves. Like all that new money doesn't necessarily it can be resources to use wisely and spend in your project. It could be the cocaine to kill yourself.
Yeah, of course.
And what is it? Most people that win the lottery, their lives are worse off after a couple of years. Like, I don't hear people in crypto talk about that a lot when they're praying for the pump, And so the pumps aren't necessarily good, but they can be good. Okay, now obviously, Bitcoin itself has gone through several pump cycles, and that has translated to resources that allowed it, people within the community to reinvest. And look, there's been people, myself, probably yourself, I imagine as well, who sold and bought over the years, Bitcoin or crypto or whatever as they needed it, through these cycles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's officially start the show for this. I know it could just be the rant about everything without any other context, but let's actually get started. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1, and go.
Introduce us.
Yes, I will. So, hey, everyone. The pause, by the way, is for the intro graphic to be playing, even though we can't
I'm sorry.
Why else do you think I was making those loud slurping noises with the coffee? Like, literally, right when I knew it would not be picked up, of course. But anyway, so, for us, hey, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Digital Cash Rundown. I'm joined by the one and only, at least that matters, Jarrod Woodard. How's it going, man?
It goes wonderfully. Getting to spend some great time with you, have some great conversation.
Absolutely. Always appreciate you on the show. It's going to be a good one today, for sure. I'm just predicting it, putting it out there, right? Law of attraction and all that.
One time, this is the show.
If you feel free to leave comments in the live chats and stuff. If you're in my Discord, which I know Jarrod is, and by the way, if you come on the show, you get an NFT that gets you in there. You can leave comments in the Digital Cash Rundown channel, and they will be read out. Everyone else gets kind of like sloppy seconds or whatever. It's like, well, if I really like what you're saying, I'll put it up on the screen, but not necessarily. So most of probably what we're going to talk about today is crypto and crypto governance stuff. But first, got to hit the headlines that bring all the people to the yard. It's lawsuit time, boys and girls. Here we go. So Gemini files lawsuit against Digital Currency Group and Barry Silbert over Genesis and Earn program. All right, so first of all, have you been following this mess of a drama over the last few months?
It just showed up on my radar today, and I read like a quick blurb on it. It just like you called it. It just seems like old crypto. It's worse because it's crypto mixed with finance, like old finance drama. and like the old like Three Arrows Capital falling and taking so many out with it. And where was your due diligence? It's like, oh, Lord.
And I can't. I mean, and apologies for being so like, but like, wasn't it FTX that sunk them, or did they sink FTX? I don't remember.
Oh, they all sunk themselves. They all owned. No, they made their choices, and they didn't do the due diligence. They didn't like. We're supposed to have figured out finance by now, about who you could trust and why, and all these good things. These people were taking obscene risks, and they made their bed. They get to lie in it, and that goes down to the individuals who chose to invest in these institutions that didn't have integrity. They weren't there for the long run. That's that's what happens when you make an investment. It can go down, and it's up to you as an individual to qualify who you're doing business with. You're the one, though. No one's coming to save you. You're the one who gets to live with it in the end.
Yeah, of course. And it's been kind of insane to see, just like, because Digital Currency Group they were always the suits, and people always like kind of resented them for being the suits, I think. But they were the suits that, like, over the years, it's always been, Coinbase, and then DCG's portfolio has always been like the blessed by the industry captains. And there's other weird, like, sketchy shit coins that are listed only on Binance that go up and then down and up and down. And it's like, these are the ones that, like, these are the captains of industry that kind of make it through the cycles and act all polished and, have like a suit and tie and like all this kind of stuff. And it's like, and it just, and then they always have this like nice austere public persona until now, until it finally, this last cycle, they got in over the head with some things. And then now they're acting like the same old like petty scammers like Celsius and other people like that. Like there's this like very disappointing vibe. It's just kind of like that like perfect,
absolutely,
like the perfect couple that and like they start to like publicly fight and stuff, and or they're going through a public messy breakup. You're like, not you guys. Like you guys were the like you guys were like the quiet ones who didn't party and like didn't get into all the drama. Now you're doing. It's
no, they just did a good job of hiding it.
Exactly.
And the institutions within could have changed over the years. One of the big long-term crypto institutions whose reputation was completely destroyed, in my opinion, through all of this, it was blockchain. You remember blockchain.info?
Yeah, that was my very first crypto wallet. It was
delightful back in the day. Used it in 2014. And they were late into the game to get into to create an exchange and all that stuff and develop. And they did eventually, and then got just decided, like, just chased the money completely. Like, and when you're at that point where you're like, oh, we're so far behind, now we've got to start doing what Coinbase was doing because we missed out. It's like, pause and reflect. I totally get, like, make up where you're lacking. But anyways, like, long story short, similar thing for them. Like, they got involved with Three Arrows Capital, and it caused them massive, problems with all this came out. And to me, that was just like, all right, cool. That in any rational market, that should be the end of your reputation. Like, like you've got a long way to come, and you have to acknowledge this stuff. Like, come out publicly, like, we messed up in this incredible way. Here's how we messed up. Here's what we're doing about it. And so it's just, but the status quo these days is not much responsibility and accountability. So people probably won't hold them that accountable.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive into a little bit of the lawsuit type thing, or like the tweet. So I had this stuff from good old Cameron Winklevoss. He posted, he said, today Gemini filed a lawsuit. Barry was not only the architect and mastermind behind DCG and Genesis fraud against creditors, he's directly and personally involved in perpetrating it. So they're suing not only Digital Currency Group for basically not paying when their subsidiary Genesis went belly up, right? Then they got exposed to the Three Arrows Capital, and they lost a bunch of money. He's not only saying that, but he's saying that Barry Silbert himself, who's founded DCG, he's personally responsible. So they're suing both of those, which is kind of crazy. And it's kind of funny because all this Twitter stuff is clearly theater. All this open letter stuff is clearly theater. But it's very telling, like, let me just get through a little bit of this. This complaint, blah, blah, blah. It says, Barry claimed that Genesis faced only a timing issue, a lie that he had the gaping hole in Genesis' balance sheet. He talks about when 3 Hours of Capital collapsed, they blew a huge hole in the balance sheet. Instead of coming clean, Genesis claimed everything was business as usual because DCG has stepped in to absorb the losses. But what they really did, according to Cameron, is written some weird 10-year promissory note and counted that as like, oh look, see they're whole because we promised to give them a bunch of money over 10 years and something. They'll be fine. And so now he's claiming that they created false financial reports and stuff like that. And yeah, basically now Genesis creditors can't get anything. And so he says this fraud goes to the very top. Barry Silbert and other DCG executives were directly involved in these lies, and they lied again and again to conceal the truth from Gemini and other creditors. And then blah, blah, blah. He just talks about more of this stuff. And he just says that DC and Barry personally are direct participants in the fraud, and that's why he's holding them accountable or whatever. Now, DCG had some they almost haven't said anything, but they just had a little statement which just says, this is yet another publicity stunt from Cameron Winklevoss to deflect blame and responsibility, blah, blah, blah. He says, it's all baseless, defamatory, and false, but it doesn't address, as usual, it doesn't address any of the things that are actually being said. So I guess I'll say before I ask what you think on this is, it's clear, one thing that's clear is that DCG is in the position of power of the situation right now because the Winklevoss twins are trying to get them to do something, whereas they're really wanting them to do something. And the other thing is the Winklevoss twins seem to think that the court of public opinion, and now obviously the court of law, favor them because they're being very chatty. They're being very free with what they're saying. Whereas DCG is saying not much. They're just being... So what do you make of the dynamic, the situation? Because I'm definitely not picking sides or who's the angel or devil in this thing at all. But clearly there's a little bit of an asymmetry in the side of things.
So I'm a little bit conflicted in the sense, in one side, I'm like, this is what you get. You all deserve each other. You play this because Gemini got started in New York, and to me, New York is just such a hellscape legally that
legally. Why legally, that caveat? How about it just is?
Specifically, but also more. It is anti-crypto. It is all anti-liberty, the opposite of all these things. And so for Gemini to be home based there, it's like, okay, you're telling me about the company you keep and the jurisdiction you're fine enabling and supporting through the taxes you pay and all that, or the taxes you surrender and all that stuff. So it's like, all right, cool. Now you're having Finance 1.0 drama and you get what you deserve. So there's that side of me. There's also a side of me that's like, look, this is, of course, the practical, this is the world we live in. And, these people who live in that world and participate in the other and can help bring us to this better world, they're providing a service. It's like, yeah, sure, you don't have to do it in San Francisco. You don't have to do it in New York. You don't have to do it in these places, and support and develop and increase what they can do financially and the way they can tyrannize the world by adding money to their economy. You don't have to do it in those locations. You could go to New Hampshire. You could go to Wyoming. There's plenty of other places you could be doing this stuff. You do not have to support the beast.
It's definitely they've definitely picked New York, obviously, for old school financial reasons, not for crypto tech innovation reasons.
Sure.
And I mean, obviously, based on if you want access to all the legacy financial system, New York is advantageous. If you want access to all the Silicon Valley VC stuff, San Francisco is advantageous. If you want to just trailblaze from scratch, which is a lot harder, but a lot more free, then you pick somewhere else, right? So it's very clear where what they try to do.
And I want to make a caveat too, as well. Like the early Bitcoiners, people just getting crypto established and off the ground at all. I'm not critical of them doing that in places like that to get it noticed. But when you're establishing a big exchange and I don't know the exact history of it, but I think Jim and I was one of those, like, we're pro regulation, you're like, okay. I get people having to do that now. You didn't so much back then, and it didn't do you any good in the intervening years. It only did work. It only did harm.
Yeah, but so on this specific case, on the specific dispute over the Genesis creditors, or first of all parties involved, in my opinion, in this case uneducated opinion, but seem to me to be operating a risky financial scheme, right? And they wanted money, which I don't fault anyone for wanting money, right? That's just the way the world works. But the lengths to which they were willing to go, like, I think they just assumed, like, so they got all these, they wanted more money, so they took all these depositors' money and then put them into something. So, like, we'll give you interest on this. We just, like, want your money so we can make even more money. And so, I mean, buyer beware, obviously, to a certain extent, but, like, also the average crypto person just, like, on their trusted Gemini exchange that has, like, regulated, trusted, like, billboards all over New York City. Like, they're super strong in the messaging. I think it's a reasonable assumption for a lay person to think, oh, these guys it's like a bank. It's like a trusted New York financial institution. Whatever they're promising me is legit, which doesn't completely absolve buyer beware, of course. But then again, I say don't deposit your money in banks at all. But that's my level of buyer beware.
I'm totally on the side of you get what you deserve. You weren't into the crypto to care enough. Like, that should have been a red flag. Well regulated, government approved.
Yeah.
Like, that should have been a red flag. But you don't have those. They didn't have those core values. These are the same people voting to take away our rights or to have people point guns at us. And so this is an argument for the practical value in finding virtue and finding, like, morality and those things, because it'll help you avoid these things. You'll look at stuff like that and you'll say, whoa, that's a red flag. I'm going to, at the very least, be skeptical of that.
Yeah, I would say that. But
to me, it's like, okay, you play with these things, you play with these pirates, you get what you deserve.
Yeah. So I would sort of equate that to when I got a little bit of UST back in the day, and that was like, I kind of understood the mechanism. I understood how it worked. I was not in a position where I was too skeptical to actually get into participate in Luna. However, a lot of people I knew and trusted were, like, really hyped on it. And I'm like, well, I'm already diversifying a little bit into some stable coins at the top of this bull market, I should say. Rather than have it all in BUSD, which is, as it turns out, later ended up having, regulatory issues. But that, I mean, I got rid of mine way before that. But I'm like, well, just put some of that into USD. It can't be that much of a harm. And then, it crashed. I think I sold, I had, like, very little in it, right? Let's be very clear about that. I had very little in it, and it went down. I got, like, 20 cents on the dollar back when I sold it. So it's like I lost, I'm like, yeah, whatever. And, like, most of that was staking rewards from staking the BUSD anyway. So it's just more like I'm not complaining, but the point is, I did something that wasn't in my best education to do. Like, I got burned for it, I guess, and I accept that. It's like buyer beware. I didn't beware.
I'm not necessarily critical of that. Like, we're gonna like, you get amounts. It's what expectation you have, and whenever the consequences arrive, do you play victim or do you accept responsibility? And you're like, oh yeah, I knew I was juggling this amount of this money here, and that's what happens when you take that risk. Same thing when you play with these old systems, or when you play with, like, big thumbs up, we're well regulated.
Yeah.
It's like, look at all the banks, the recently and all that headache and stuff there, that's supposed to be all this big, careful rate. Look at how many times have the fiat currencies of states been wiped out, destroyed. Sorry, we've got to rebalance everything. $1 million is now worth $1,000 or what? You're getting 1,000 Liberty coins. Like goes back to the dawn of time. If someone doesn't have that message,
Yeah, resource management is pretty brutal if you think about it. But it's still like the average creditor. I mean, there's a little bit of buyer everywhere. I tend to be more on the sympathetic side of like, well, the banking system, like for people like us who know about banking, like that's very different. For normies who just think that because you're required to have a bank account to do anything. In fact, in Europe, from my understanding, it's your form of KYC. Your form of KYC to even get a job. Like literally, you cannot work without a bank account. And so it's like, well, that's like a trusted institution. So I have a little more sympathy towards the basic, the creditors, right? The depositors. Now, what I don't have sympathy towards are the Winklevoss twins or Silbert, because they know everything.
Well, actually, I don't know.
Right.
We've got we've got this history in society of like we hold rich people way more responsible, or people they're supposed to be higher, like private people of authority in some way, shape, or form, way more responsible than individuals. And like they're supposed to be like the downtrodden and oppressed. It's like, when's the last time you saw someone empathize with like rich people? They are the last people to get any empathy.
I empathize with rich people. It's so like, for example, with like Coinbase and Binance and stuff being sued by the SEC, from my perspective, 100% empathy there. Like, I don't care if they're like, they shouldn't be targeted. That's fine. I don't care if they're rich. I don't care if they did some other sketchy things other times. I don't care. In that case, the thing is, the Winklevoss twins knew the product that they're offering. They knew that it was guaranteed by some highly risky financial things. And they kind of leaned on their buddies, DCG, to be like, well, they know what they're doing. And if a giant hole gets blown into this, they'll find a way to make it whole for us. And I think they falsely assumed that their buddy Barry would actually come through rather than just be completely self-interested. Well, I mean, everyone's self-interested, I should say. Be completely like,
I think most likely, and this is like my wild speculation, someone like Barry, they thought this stuff would fly out. They thought 3 Rs Capital, they didn't do their due diligence on all that stuff. They took risks because they as well were in an area where maybe they know that they don't know up to a certain point. And I apply that to the same degree to the individuals, the individual creditors, the people that get involved. We could say like they're in this state of ignorance and so they're innocent, but no, they know that they don't know. And that's on them. So, and they're taking that much risk. And look, when you take that risk, part of what comes with that is the downside. And so like I have some sympathy that it didn't play out well, but it doesn't help them not make these choices in the future if they don't learn to take responsibility for themselves and what they did in there. What's going to happen is a lot of people are going to get burned in situations like that and turn around and say, we need more state, we need more regulation, and
yeah, of course. But so it's kind of funny, like from what I'm able to tell, it seems like all the objections against DCG seem to be accurate, right? They seem to be real. And the fact that they're putting it out there so publicly means they're not afraid of being called on lies in the future. It means that they're like, we're pretty sure that this will all hold up. And it's not going to be used against us in a court of law where they've actually gone to a court of law now. Like, they seem to be there. But the parts that they haven't said, or maybe whatever, is, yes, their own responsibility. So when talking about risk, right, I don't necessarily fault either of those two parties that were better with each other for taking risk. The thing is, you take risk you can manage. And so if you take a really risky investment, like everything I put in stable coins was stuff that I was ready to lose. Everything I have in crypto, like the valuation, I pay whatever I need to now. So if the price goes in the shitter, I still like, I understand the risk, but I'm able to absorb the risk is the point.
Well, it's fair to say you're an expert on this. Dude, you've got more than 10,000 hours of living crypto. You're an expert.
I should say I have expert level time in that, but as far as like intentional time, like I do it unthinkingly, right? It's not like I think about my risk very, like a lot of people are much more.
You're making the case to me even more.
Well, I guess the
you're
point
the
is
expert
like,
on living on crypto. Yeah.
yes, I guess the point is like, even when I do things, like for example, I train jiu-jitsu, and sometimes you get injured. Not thankfully, I've gotten very few injuries. You know, just a couple nagging things here and there, but are mostly fine. I've gotten almost nothing in my several years of doing it. But one of the reasons why I do that instead of like Muay Thai is if I did Muay Thai kickboxing, there's a very real chance of getting like brain injuries, like getting hit, getting knocked out, getting that, and that's a risk that, especially in competition, I where you're trying to knock each other out, I don't feel comfortable with. Right? I do feel comfortable with like the worst thing that happens. I go to a jiu-jitsu tournament and someone chokes me until I pass out, and they just like shake my feet and I wake up later. That's fine. Or they crank and like I get like a broken arm and I gotta like fix that. Like I'm okay with that level of risk, because even though it's small, very small, it's still like, what if this happens? I get something broken. Like, I'm okay with
broken
that
arm is a different world to like damaged mind.
Yeah, to like to something like permanent, and like, oh yeah, your arm never straightens the same or something.
Well, and a blow to the head can change your personality, make you more violent. Yeah.
And so the thing about the managed risk, neither side, I think that both sides, both these parties should have been prepared to absorb this risk. And neither, like, to absorb, like, with the risk taken, to absorb the whole. And neither of them wants to claim responsibility for the whole. It's both, again, I'm not a lawyer, right? I personally believe it's on both of them. It's the Winklevoss twins. They got, Gemini got in bed with Genesis. They used them for their lending program. They marketed it. They got the consumers. They have a responsibility to those consumers, in my opinion, for the risk that they did. And also, you know, DCG and Genesis, if one of their entities has a hole blown in them, they should make that whole. They should pay their debts too. And neither side wants to pay their debts, and they're both kind of grandstanding on like, no, you fix it. No, you fix it. And that's where the business relationship that I'm sure was very good for many years is gone to nothing, because they assumed the other would have their back in this mutual risk thing, but instead no one has nobody's back.
That's just another way of being careless. Another word for carelessness when they assume. And
socially careless.
And I would say, I don't know the facts and the details of their particular situation. I mean, now to me, there's three parties. There's Genesis, there's GCD. I'm sorry, there's the Winklevoss twins, there's Barry Silbert, their teams, and then there's the individual consumers, and all share in some amount of responsibility. And the degree to which either of the institutions were committing fraud, yes, the consumers should be compensated for that. The degree to which they were not, and it was just bad risk, you know, and things turned out unfortunately, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the consumers should not be made whole for that. That's part of the risk they were taking. So that's, to me, the way it should play out. And I'm curious about where we call, and this is a question I don't know the answer to, like what's the line between it's fraud or it's not? Because if you come to me and you make this claim that's not possible, like financial return wise, and I naively buy into that, you give the example, like, you know, I've got this bag of rocks. I'm going to turn around and, you know, we're selling them for $1 million and blah, blah, blah. That's so wild. Yes, that is like technically fraud, but it's so wild of it being a possibility of a thing that it's like, how could you get involved with that? I don't know where to draw that line of like, you should be smart enough. If you claim the right to sign a contract, you got to have X amount of responsibility and intelligence to do these things. So yeah. I'm not sure about those lines, you know, and that would help regulate. Sorry, go ahead.
The thing is, this may be a greater commentary on like the consumer market in general. I think that like a lot of the fine print that they make you read, like terms, a lot of it is too fine. But in general, of everything, it's just like the bare minimum to hold up in court. But like, there are a few, just my knowledge, like for example, like FDIC insured, right?
Mm-hmm.
People think that anything that has like we have an account, they assume that a lot of times it's also FDIC insured. Now, first off, and people don't even know what the limits of that insurance are, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a different story. That would be another hour-long podcast. But like,
Yeah.
as far as the actual, like for example, a lot of I think it was like Voyager or something. It was one of those crypto exchanges that went kaput. Had phrased something to basically lead consumers to believe that their deposits were FDIC insured when they weren't. I can't remember that, and that in my view is like actual fraud. But like also, for example, Strike, you know, the Lightning, the laser-eyed Maxi, basically Coinbase front. It's not a Coinbase front end, but it's basically it's like Coinbase with one coin. Anyway, they had to switch. Their custodian crashed in the last few weeks or a few months or whatever it was, and they had to switch custodians. Same thing with Swan Bitcoin. Again, another Coinbase front end. Not literally. I'm just being funny. They had to switch it, but Strike, as far as I know, is now custodying their own customers' funds. Like they're doing the custody themselves. And from my understanding, they were using a registered custodian before, meaning that was customer deposits were SAFU, right? They were actually customer deposits were customer deposits. Yeah. Now, so in the case of like a bankruptcy or whatever, you have to give them back to the customers. Whereas now that Strike is doing it themselves and they're not a licensed custodian, as far as I'm aware, that means that any Strike customer, Strike owns all the customers' funds now. So if Strike goes kaput, all the consumers just lose their money. And I don't, and again, this is legally from my understanding, but I don't think any or more than like 12 Strike customers have any idea that now their money is not even their money really. Like could literally, I don't think they know that. And that's horrible.
But how, but that's on them as individuals.
Yeah.
To me, that's definitely on them as individuals. You got, I'm sorry, like, it is a hazard to me if there's people that are that careless about themselves in society, and them having negative consequences for the risks they take is an incentive to wise up and take ownership, personal ownership and responsibility. The market solves this problem if we leave it alone.
Yes, I mean, I agree absolutely. In principle, I agree absolutely. In practice, I agree very strongly, but not absolutely. The only reason it's not absolute in practice is because we don't live in that environment. We live in an environment where it's super regulated as far as who can get into the space and kind of act. And there's an expectation. There's promises through like the 40% of everything you make that gets stolen from you. There's laws and regulations so basically what I would say is for a libertarian, it's definitely buyer beware, right?
No, we can't do that world. We can't do that world. No. A libertarian has to put up with a lot of grief. And the degree to which they're consistent with that libertarianism or moral philosophy and those kinds of things, they have to put up a lot of that. We don't give them, they're not going to put them for more responsibility, the ones who have taken on this burden of helping the BS in the world.
Well, what I'm saying is people who don't agree with the state existing are definitely buyers who are beware, if you know what I'm saying. Whereas the other people who still believe the government's still there to protect them and protect their deposits and things like that, I give them a little bit of a sympathy pass for like not being red pilled until they lose.
Not me, because to me, being wiser is the reward of putting up with all that grief. And these other people chose not to be wise or not to pursue wisdom, not to pursue not to pursue morality about like, is this really good and evil? Is this really theft? Is this really like, what am I doing to other people? Is this really they don't care to ask the question or pursue that. And this is the consequence. It's like, okay. So to me, like, this is just the universe being just. There is a reward to being virtuous and pursuing wisdom, self-knowledge, morality, those kinds of things. And that's great. Like that's a white pill about life in the universe, you know? And there are negative consequences to not pursuing those things, and this is some of that, in my opinion. That's the way I look at it. And then I don't want to get like the people who are taking the burden of making the world a better place. I also don't want to give them the burden of a higher level of accountability. It's like no. If you choose to live as a sheep, you are subject to the flotsam and jetsam of the waves. You know, that's what happens. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing we'll definitely agree on is the more accountability and, you know, personal responsibility on everything people could be kind of encouraged into, the better. And I do think that the kind of the consumer protection ideas, whether that's through a government or whether that's just through third parties that certify things and stuff like that, I definitely think that needs to be very much secondary to like people figuring out on their own what works and what doesn't and taking personal responsibility for that. That's definitely something I think will improve society and also decrease the burden on like these systems. I mean, some of them I don't want to exist to begin with, but even the ones they do want to be, I think the burden is on them too much to like, well, you should tell everyone what's safe to invest in. It's like,
But okay, so now I have compassion for where people are just they live in this world and they're surrounded by all this messaging and stuff, and yeah, so you can it is quite possibly in this world of like you're indoctrinated into it and you're ingrained in it. But who hasn't? I find it very rare to come across people who haven't come across like some libertarian arguments and things like that. And then and so it is. There are also people in that realm. I can have compassion for the fact that people were raised in this Plato's cave and they're conditioned into it. But there's also like now more than ever, and with the internet and people being able to communicate and like fewer and fewer people have ever actually heard these arguments. You know, so and now and also. Oh man, I lost my train of thought.
Okay, perfect time to lose a train of thought because we got to hit on governance. So, just open-ended governance type stuff. But I will hit on this one. So, just because I like to have things on the screen to like change subjects, I got a few of like Justin Bond's tweets. Hi, Justin. I put a few of his tweets on the screen because he's harped about. He's probably one of the more public crypto figures who's harped on this the most. So I'll put that. So in this one, he says he has a pie chart of the implementation of nodes for Bitcoin, and it's almost all Bitcoin Core, right? And he says BTC's governance is effectively centralized under Bitcoin Core. There is one lead maintainer who has the final say, making it a dictatorship. Like all dictatorships, there are limits to what they can get away with. However, this is still a total perversion of true decentralization, which maybe to some people watching is like a little bit of a mind blow. First off, agree or disagree with what he said?
Oh man, I don't really know. Because in some sense, I'm like, okay, to me, a blockchain is the people. It's not. It's the code is replicable ad infinitum, so it doesn't matter. So that aspect doesn't matter as much, but it's the coordination of the people around that. And so if you did have this one dictator who betrayed things or whatever, like the community could just be like, it could fork again, and then you could have like dictator coin and the old community coin or whatever. So there's that aspect of it. Is the way in which I criticize Bitcoin Core as being centralized, it's more in this in the attitude of the common. I see that way more when I see that as an average of the interactions I have with Bitcoin Core people, and then the degree to which they're absolute maxis and they're like the degree to which they hate crypto more than fiat, that kind of stuff. That's what worries me. That tells me a lot more about a coin's centralization than a detail like that. That's not something I. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
I'll definitely agree. I'll definitely agree. And sorry for hitting like the more speed round type.
Let's do it. Yeah.
type elements on the big governance thing, but we got to the baseline, which I think I'll agree with. Which, in a decentralized system where people can choose which ones they use, and especially in one where it's open source. Anyone can fork the Bitcoin code and just make a different one, and the same works for pretty much every single crypto or every true crypto, right? in the way that the community has the ultimate say, kind of like when Steam became like centralized under Justin Sun, and everyone just made Hive and ran off there. Again, that's the ultimate deciding factor. And so I think that's what makes things crypto. If it's not that, it's not crypto. Now, beyond that, though, the ability to make decisions other than the binary of like, let's all literally dump the entire project. There is quite a lot of centralizing elements to that. And so with the Bitcoin situation, with Bitcoin and the other Bitcoin-like cryptocurrencies in terms of governance, that it just, whatever implementation is being implemented is the one that, works. And I think that because it's just so, anyone can do GitHub, anyone can do this. You can have multiple implementations of the node. It's fine. And like miners can decide to implement whatever. Because it's so free like that, it gives the illusion of more decentralization than the reality ends up being. It's kind of, it's tragedy, in my personal opinion, and I guess Justin as well. It's like tragedy of the commons at that point, where because there's just so little control over it, it's so relatively easy for someone to come in and colonize and just like now. So now Bitcoin Core, like all the other implementations started to die out because everything Bitcoin Core did is what got into the final code. And then there's a repository with a lead maintainer, and what that person says at the end of the day goes. So now it's the development of it. Of course, the ecosystem can choose like, no, we don't want to do that, but then you still have to like go with another implementation. It's still kind of centralizing. So it's a very like covert, soft dictatorship kind of, with the ultimate ability to just dump it and move on to something else if you need to. So I would call that I would call Bitcoin in that case, Bitcoin's governance semi-centralized in that way. I wouldn't say.
Oh, I agree.
I'd
That
say
definitely that's to me. That's not the line that says like I'm now going to call this centralized, but it definitely goes in the category of this makes it more centralized, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so, hitting on to the next thing in this lightning round. So, in this big long tweet thread, whatever, one of the things that Justin's recently started to complain about has been Ethereum. Ethereum basically not learning from Bitcoin's mistakes. And he says, Ethereum is now going down the same bad path as BTC by pivoting away from L1 scaling in favor of L2. He says, in part due to misaligned developer incentives. He says, and the rejection of on-chain governance. And then some other stuff. But his big thing is he does not like that Ethereum, again, it's just like, well, the developers will do whatever, and the community implements this like wishy-washy softness that basically allows one group to just in practice become almost dictatorial. Like, for example, the big thing that he's complained about is, projects like Tezos and Near and stuff like that have done, enshrined rollups and L1 sharding and stuff like that, like better layer one scaling things, and not just pushed everything to L2. Execution sharding was on Ethereum's roadmap, but they got kind of quietly removed not too long ago. And who made that decision? And why was no one else informed when everyone said for years sharding? Like, there's clearly someone's calling the shots when they're not supposed to, according to people's conceptions, calling the shots. It's the same situation as Bitcoin, where you got anyone can develop, but let's be honest, one group is doing most of the development, or their stuff is being implemented into the core protocol, and their governance structure is not at all is intentional in that way. It's a de facto oligarchy dictatorship kind of thing. And again, you can move to a different chain. You can fork the chain at any point. You can do whatever. But it's the same kind of like a semi-centralized thing. That's what it seems like. What do you think?
But okay, so here's the thing. And this gets into another realm. I haven't really gotten to the nitty-gritty of myself, so I don't know the answers or where I would fall on it. But implicit promises and contracts versus explicit promises and contracts. And I get situations and circumstances where you can have both. To me, the ideal, and if you want to be like secure as best you can, you make sure you get involved with explicit contracts. And in Bitcoin and in Ethereum, there is no explicit contract that governance is going to happen this way, that this is going to be the way things go, that we're going to vote, or we're going to use this mechanism to determine how decisions get made. and so is the individual when you participate with those things. And here's the one that matters most, is what kills me about crypto, that this isn't at the heart and core of it. Is it voluntary or not? That's step one. That's the first most important moral question. After that, we can start getting into other details. And to my understanding, Bitcoin and Ethereum are voluntary. So, then play with that if you want to, and find better options if you can. I don't know of a chain that has an explicit, like, here's the contract, here's the conditions by which, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and blah, blah, blah. And these contracts might as well don't have to be legally enforcing. They can be socially enforced, in that if the contract is broken, or you don't like it, or we don't come to some kind of resolution, the expectation is that you fork, is that now we go our separate ways. To me, that would be like the ideal kind of crypto governance solution. I'm going to build something like that eventually, but not in the near term, because I thought about that in 2014. No one's done it yet. No one's going to do it. So I'll have to do it.
Yeah. So one other thing I should point out, right? Maybe I'll hit that for the last slide. So, and by the way, we're coming up on 4. So just let me know, and just, you can say it on air, I'm sure too, when you got to take off, down to the minute.
Sure.
We'll get it nice and tight. But Bonds also said, all cryptocurrencies start centralized. The dilemma lies in transitioning governance from centralized to decentralized. Dictators are needed, but with scale, they must be overthrown. On-chain governance is the answer. Even if it does not work without scale, it does set precedent. So, that's a lot of strong statements, but also nuance in the way they're worded. What are your thoughts on that thing?
I'm not sure. I'd like to know more about why he believes that you have to have a dictatorship to begin with. So I don't know. That's not evident to me that has to be the case, especially at this point with all the things out there. You can have mechanisms where,
I guess, the idea. So at the root, Satoshi was very clearly, I don't know if the dictator is the right term, but the centralizing force behind Bitcoin, meaning Satoshi or whoever that was, or the multiple people that might have been, published the code, did most of the early mining, and basically whatever Satoshi said just happened. And it's in a very practical kind of a sense, even though structurally Bitcoin is released in a relatively decentralized way. And then over time, of course, Satoshi left. You take that off, there's always a power vacuum. Other people scramble to get in there, but it's usually not like a clear air. And so, especially because of clear air, Gavin Andreessen didn't end up having the pull long term, or got ousted or whatever. So things kind of went out from there. And you could say, Vitalik, whatever Vitalik said basically went on Ethereum for a long time. Maybe even today. You might even be able to say that today. I'm not as familiar with Ethereum's governance setup to know if that's actually true. But basically, it's like that. And then every project, it's just really hard to start from absolutely zero with absolute decentralization.
Yeah, to me, the problem here is that we don't have a word for voluntary, a voluntary leader or a voluntary authority. There's nothing wrong with authority. As anarchists would like be put on the opposite side of authority, but there's nothing wrong with legitimate authority. Is it voluntary? Is the relationship voluntary or not? That's what matters. The dentist has the authority. I'm paying them to be an authority on what I should do about my teeth. That's the relationship. So to me, Satoshi Nakamoto was a legitimate voluntary authority. He spoke, people listened, he did things, people followed. That is not a dictator. We don't have a word for that. We don't have that concept in society. So when something similar to that shows up, we wedge in the term we know, which is dictator. One person has all the power. It's a different kind of power. There's a power if you own people, or you claim the right to use violence against them, and then there's the power of you're persuasive and you negotiate, and you're just really good at what you're doing.
Yeah, so
people want to listen to you. Yes, no, it's not cult leader.
Yeah, it's funny.
Oh, yeah.
But kind of like, for example, Litecoin and Charlie Lee. Charlie Lee, for the very, very longest time, has not held anything that you could call real power over Litecoin, to my knowledge. But to in practice power, he still holds a lot, although it's less all the time since he's kind of doing other things and he dumped his stash and all that kind of stuff. But like in the very beginning, like for most of the time, it's just because he was the guy who made Litecoin, and he was the guy who made Litecoin happen on Coinbase, and he was the guy who a bunch of different things. In practice, what Charlie said kind of went, but not because he actually was seated at the top of this thing.
Yeah.
It's just that he happened to be the influential leader, and so
he had the respect and authority, voluntary, legitimate, totally fine. If there's nothing wrong with authority or power in this way, where it's just you're really good at what you do, so people listen to you. You go to a dojo to get trained, and they got there's I don't know what it is. Yeah, okay. And so when I don't know how do you refer to like the boss dude?
Sensei is in Japanese arts, sabunim for Korean, and then they tend to translate it to coach or professor for like jujitsu. Professor is kind of a bastardization of Brazilian, Portuguese for anyway. I don't know.
Awesome. So voluntary authority. He's not some power wielder, and you want to hear what he has to say because he's going to make you better at what you do. I want a Charlie Lee to help me with Litecoin because he's going to make it better.
Yeah, so this other thing that Justin said, he says, credit where credit is due. Out of the top 50 cryptocurrencies by market cap, 12 have implemented on-chain governance. He said, I don't even know most of these, I don't really care, but DOT, Atom, Uni, TON, ICP, Lido, APT, Algo, FTM, Aave, and EOS. And maybe Tezos is just like outside the top. I don't care, give a crap about market cap rankings anyway.
What did he say, top 50?
May of this year. Mid-May, so
it
doesn't matter.
It
but
popped out,
the point is, you just mentioned top 50 because you can't really, jump on everything.
There's so many coins.
But that's the thing is, he mentions like on-chain governance as like a super important thing, and here's where I've kind of reached, where I'm kind of like, I'm trying to learn more. Of course, I'm not at the point where I think I know it, and I hope I never get to where I really think I know everything, but. So in terms of like this founder kind of thing, and like it's been very clear that whatever Vitalik and the Ethereum core developers or whatever have said has been what happens despite the community wanting things like, allegedly over time. Again, I haven't been super deep into it, wanting execution sharding and stuff like that. It seems like what they say goes. Same thing with Bitcoin. The entire reason there's altcoins, as they're called altcoins, is because a lot of people were unable to do what they wanted in Bitcoin, which is not necessarily governance failure. Can't do everything, right? But there's very clearly a rift, the block size wars and all that kind of stuff. It was a very clear thing that happened because one group controlled what happened in Bitcoin, and a lot of people did not like what that was. And that group, Bitcoin core developers, probably heavily influenced by Blockstream. Again, depends on, everyone has their own little take on like how conspiratorial want to get on that, but it's pretty it's pretty clear that there was some kind of forcing stuff towards L2s as opposed to on-chain scaling from whatever. And so and then every other project has been too small to really care what happens when the founder leaves. The founder leaves and dies, kind of, in a lot of ways, right? Now, my data point that is like the longest running official DAO Dash, my data point is Evan Duffield started it. He ran it from 2014 to 2017 as like the figurehead, but he implemented like on-chain voting in 2015, I believe.
One of the longest standing first DAOs in crypto. He's always like a head in the clouds kind of guy. He never was like a strong leader. And so he just put out governance proposal once in a while and everyone voted. At 2017, his finance director guy for the very small Dash Core team, which ended up succeeding him. Some rumors say, maybe he was sort of forced out behind the scenes. I don't know. It's hard to tell. But anyway, this guy, you could say Ryan Taylor was the figurehead of Dash from 2017 to 2022. And at the end of 2022, middle of 2022, like a little over a year ago, the community was dissatisfied and basically held a vote to fire him, basically. And he got fired. He left. And now there's no successor. Sam Westrich, Quantum Explorer, is the
main developer, he's kind of viewed as a figurehead, but much more of a loose figurehead. But anyway, so it's clear to see that the governance system works in that the figureheads have been there as long as they have, but at some point, if the figurehead can be deposed by the network in a real practical way, where that guy was there calling the shots and he left when there was a vote that says you got to leave. And since then, the culture has radically changed again, because I'm pretty deep in the Dash community. So that's my showing of the governance thing on there. Now, on the other side of things, I'm going to pull in. So I know that governance does work in that way, right? And but now let me hit another data point, which it's kind of interesting. Let me switch the slide, the tweet. This is from Emergent Reasons, High Emergent Reasons, talking about the Bitcoin Cash upgrade to cash tokens. He says, the upgrade is supported by many full nodes: BCHD, BCH Bitcoin Cash node, BCH Unlimited, that's 3 so far, Bitcoin Verde, Knuth node, and soon to be Flowy. These are all different teams. Now, just like how Justin Bonds was showing in the other one, how the development teams around Bitcoin started to kind of like the implementation started to kind of skinny out till it's all Bitcoin Core basically. And Bitcoin Cash was ABC, adjustable block cap, or whatever that meant. Bitcoin ABC was basically the one that ran stuff, even though there's other kind of teams around it that did other things too. But then they ended up getting kicked out of Bitcoin Cash and starting eCash, right? So now it's a collection of nodes of node implementations that allegedly, again, I'm not super close into the ecosystem, but they allegedly work together on like protocol level changes, and then they all decide to implement stuff, and it's like a very well decentralized governance system. Now, where this becomes for example, the contrast with the Dash system. The Dash system is very explicit, as in you have stakeholders who vote, and that is, in theory, that decides things. In practice, that absolutely has decided things as well. And that's one way of doing things. Now, here's the question that I now have, which I don't have my own answer to yet, is can you take something like Bitcoin Cash, where all centralizing forces just end up getting run out of the community over time until you end up with a system that's doesn't have any explicit governance at all, but through practical reasons you end up having a decentralized enough collection of power things that it does end up working out? Or, and this remains to be seen, will Bitcoin Cash over time, will the major node implementations start to kind of drop off because they're superfluous, and then you end up back with a one centralized kind of thing? What do you think? Because I don't have my own answer to this yet.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you... If I do want to achieve that, I want to see blockchains have that option and capacity, and it hits on a lot of stuff, so I'm going to try to go as fast as I can. We don't know how to voluntarily govern ourselves and organize. All right, we're like people, like, the Shawshank Redemption. The man gets out of prison and he has to ask permission to go to the bathroom when he's working at you remember that scene where Morgan Freeman's got, "Can I go to the restroom, boss?" We grew up in state world, and we don't know how to self-govern and organize outside of these involuntary structures. So I'm curious to see. To me, crypto is an experiment, an opportunity, and an inevitability to explore those things. So I know I don't have all the answers, but I know first that it's got to be voluntary. After that, okay, now what I want explicit agreements. I want it written down. Here's the value. And I mean like really detailed stuff. I want like moral agreements. We're not going to tolerate theft. We don't tolerate this. We don't tolerate that, blah, blah, blah. Here's the moral explanations why, yada, yada, yada. We can do that. We could have voluntary societies on blockchains, in this way. So that's the path I would go down to help supplement those things. I would probably take something like, even if I were Bitcoin Cash, because I don't know that I want to implement it on chain yet, or maybe they can. They've got smart contracts now. Maybe they can. If they can, and it's feasible, that's great. It also matters about how much their transaction costs are, because you want to be able for people to transact signals back and forth of agreement, disagreement, communications, things like that. But I don't know that you want to be paying as high of a transaction fee for that. It should cost more to move my really important value and property, as opposed to signing a document or just saying, I want this or I want that. I hate this. I love that. Those kinds of things should be much, much cheaper. So to me, I would take something like Tezos, which is proof of stake, runs it can do all these cool, amazing technological things. I would fork that and run a private chain for my self-governance. And then, and now on chain, if I'm Bitcoin Cash, I take, here's the contract we've agreed to. And in that contract, we state that we're using, this other chain as our negotiation, our governance layer, our governance, I don't know what you would call it, community, our community structure, virtual community, whatever you want to call it, virtual voluntary community. Great. And then that could be, now you can have that contract on chain, and it could be like, understood, like if you're participating with this chain, you've implicitly agreed to this contract. And this is how things would be arbitrated, settled, blah, 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 blah. And then you have this other structure, and that can be the experimental proving grounds to figure out what kind of governance works, what kind of voluntary governance works and produces the best results.
Well, one thing's for sure, in the free market that we're in, the radical free market of crypto, it's clear that the ultimate governance thing that always works is, where do users and investors go? Like, if Ethereum and Ethereum Classic split, where do the people end up? If, which node which companies decide to stick with which chain, like that kind of stuff, that's all like the eventual deciding factor. And so that's already good. Now, the problem, in my opinion, from witnessing this, is I think that with the Bitcoin hard fork, the Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash thingy, the block size wars, is I think that the majority, maybe not a huge majority, but still the majority of the ecosystem wanted to scale on chain. But because it was hard to quantify that, and most people chose to stick with BTC to see what happens rather than go with whatever else.
Yep.
We had a problem that I think that even if my thing is like people skeptical about explicit DAOs and stuff like that. I think at a minimum there should be a good way of verifiable community polling, whether it is coin holder polling, like a purely symbolic DAO vote, or whether it's a miner, like a miner signaling, but miners don't really govern as much as people thought they would. But my point is, at that point, let's just say that what happens if the votes explicitly, so you know what the network wants, what the community wants.
Yep.
If the votes come down, 68% want bigger blocks. And then if the core team doesn't implement that, at that point they are showing to be, and everyone follows that, at least now there's no illusions about who runs the show. At least now it's an explicit dictatorship. Where otherwise, right now they kind of operate in this but the community and see which the price chart, so therefore this
I wouldn't call that explicit dictatorship, because I don't want to be trapped by the stupid decisions of mass people if they're wrong, because democracy is bad, really, really bad. Voluntary democracy would be better, but democracy in and of itself is still a horrible situation. So I would have it look, here's the deal. If we disagree, if the vote, if let's say I am a passionate core person and I know, I'm a super engineer and I know that small blocks are the way to do it. If the vote comes in for big blocks, I'll be like, okay, cool. What to me, the value of that is a peaceful separation and a much more, and we understand why we're separating. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm out. My 38% of the people that agree with me, we're going to go do our thing. Now I'm still going to compete with you to call this Bitcoin, but that becomes a whole nother matter. That's a market competition for you guys to figure out who gets to keep the name Bitcoin. But yeah, that's the value to me. If Bitcoin before that had some kind of mechanism for this, I think things would have gone much better. And retrospectively, historically, we could look back and there wouldn't be as argument or as misunderstanding about what people agreed wanted to, because it's still a debate today about like how did that fork happen, how did things break down there, and
Yeah. And I think
and so
that
yeah.
having a little more explicit knowledge of which ecosystem actors favored which thing specifically, like explicitly, I should say, as well.
Explicitly,
Not
yes.
like, because from my memory, the there was alternative Bitcoin clients that were big block clients that were the miners signaled to support, and it got in the 52 to 56% kind of like, it peaked out at there, like to where it's like majority seemed to favor big blocks, but specifically signaling for the big block implementation separate from Bitcoin Core, which is two different questions, right? It's not just bigger blocks, it's bigger blocks and this other implementation. Whereas the rest, as far as I know, were not signaling for smaller blocks. They just weren't signaling. So they were like status quo. So it wasn't explicit enough, and that's just miners. That's not even coin holders. That's not, I mean, and obviously the UASF thingy, the user activated soft fork type deal, was a node signaling thing. But nodes they're not Sybil resistant in Bitcoin. Meaning anyone can spin up a million nodes, and so all the nodes are saying that they're going to soft fork off if you increase the block size. Like, well, that could be like literally just Blockstream.
Yeah.
Yep. And so that's where it gets weird. So I would say at least what we need for governance for any system is a little more explicit polling.
Absolutely. And
that might be a good place to wrap it up if you have to take off. I know it's 20 minutes past 4. I know I'm cooking in this oven of a room right now.
Same here, man. New Hampshire's supposed to be cold.
The frozen north of 90 degrees and high humidity. Jesus.
Ooh.
Anyway. So, shill o'clock. Good. It's shill o'clock right now. What do you want to
Yes. Ooh, what do I want to shill? Well, I'm working with Stefan Molyneux, Free Domain Radio. Check out the stuff. Go to freedomain.com. We're still making philosophy and getting stuff done. We got The Truth About Pirates coming out soon. And The Truth About the Wild Wild West, some really awesome presentations helping out that stuff. And I just found out today, I don't know that we're sharing that yet, but I have a really cool project I'm working on. We just got done, well, not just, we got a Steph bot AI up and running that is trained on Steph's work. And donators can get access to that. And we also have, I've been doing a lot of stuff on AI. We did The Truth About AI Part 1, Part 2. Dude, that's been awesome. And that's part of why I'm not pursuing building this reputation network thing on my own, because the stuff I'm learning with AI is getting AI to help with the code building of things. Like you can get auto GPT, AI agents that help write programs and build code for you. Because if you're going to train AIs, you need to you have your data set, and you have to format the data set and do it. Text editing and all that cool stuff. And so you want scripts to do that for you, all this cool stuff. So, and also if you're going to fork projects and that kind of stuff, you're going to want that technology behind you as well.
Absolutely.
So AI has been cool for all the doom and gloom and things like that. I've never been more convinced that it's like any other tool.
This is the first week in a very long time I've had to completely from scratch make my own thumbnail for this podcast, because the temporary payment card that I used for that one time expired, and I couldn't get it set up back again before I started the show. So I had to go into GIMP and make my own thumbnail this time.
My brother, get in touch with me. I can tell you how to run Stable Diffusion locally, and it's getting pretty good. I think the version 2 or a new better version should be out by the end of the month. They said it's supposedly way better, but the one that's out there is pretty good. Happy to help you set that up so that you can do that locally if you want.
All right, well, I'll probably hit you up on that.
Nice.
Thanks everyone for watching. This has been a fun show. A lot of I think maybe it's probably better for the fact that it was constrained a little bit in time, because otherwise it'd be 2 hours or more of.
Oh God,
I think we kept things tighter because of this, but it's a fascinating thing. Let me comment if you're watching this after the fact, whatever. Let me know in the comments.
I'm curious to hear feedback.
What you think about specifically the governance thing, because this is one of the most important things in crypto, and one of the things where people think so many different opinions, and there's a lot of I know a lot about this compared to a lot of people, but I also
Yes.
don't have nearly enough conclusions of what I really believe is best based on this. I'm still very much in the learning phase of this. So let me know what you guys think. Please hit the subscribe button on your way out. Get those, pump up those numbers. And make sure to follow Jarrod at J84 Woodard at Twitter, right?
Well said, my friend. That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. And go to Freedom Movement Radio if you want to check out the Holy Molly. and
you get some philosophy. We talked about the benefits of virtue in pursuing these things.
And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye, guys.